Camera speed.
Sound production, take one.
Action!
Welcome to From Beneath the Hollywood Sign. If you love old movies, Hollywood history, or the golden age of filmmaking, you've come to the right place. This is the podcast that talks about amazing stories of Tinseltown from another era. Hear fascinating conversations with writer-producer Steve Cubine, who quite literally lives just beneath the Hollywood sign, and actress-writer Nan McNamara. Now your hosts, Steve and Nan.
Welcome, everyone. We're so glad that you're with us on our final part 3 of our Film Noir series. Steve, this has been such a great class.
You know, it's my favorite genre.
Yeah.
And I love the feedback we've gotten so far from listeners. So thank you guys for the positive feedback on our series.
Now, part 1, we talked about the technical elements of film noir. In part 2, we met the typical characters that inhabit these films. This week, we're going to wrap everything up by talking about the more creative features that make this special brand of dark and sexy and deadly movie.
Yes.
And there's a lot of devices that writers and directors use that have come to epitomize this genre. So let's take a look at those elements. The first one being, of course, the dialogue.
Oh, the dialogue. It's so important in film noir.
It truly is. It's short, it's snappy, it's witty, it's razor sharp, it's acerbic. It comes at you like a machine gun.
Yes.
It's such an integral part of the noir style. It's as stylized as the lighting and the camera angles that we talked about in part 1, and just to help evoke that dark moodiness. It wasn't terribly naturalistic,
No, it wasn't.
which we know we'll move into certainly in the 60s. And it often showed the cynicism of the characters and reflected this pervasive feeling of a generation who had just gotten through World War II.
Yeah, and was gearing up for the Cold War.
Right.
Yeah. I think the character of Walter Williams, played by Brian Donlevy, he sums it up really well in the movie Impact from 1949 when he says, quote, "In this world, you turn the other cheek and you get hit with a lug wrench." Well, he meant that figuratively, but in the case of this film, he meant it also literally.
Yeah.
So that's a good little teaser for dialogue.
And Gilda, 1946, Rita Hayworth, also has a cynical view of herself, another common film noir theme. She says, "If I had been a ranch, they would have called me the Bar Nothing," which I just love.
Great line, great writers here. Dialogue in film noir, it often relies on metaphors to get the point across, and a good example of this happens in Gun Crazy from 1950 when Bart Tare, played by John Dahl, and Annie Laurie Starr, played by Peggy Cummins, who we'd mentioned as part of our Femme Fatale section, when they go on this crime spree that leads to murder, and he's trying to articulate what their bizarre fatal attraction to each other is, and he uses this artificial yet kind of clever dialogue to describe his relationship with Annie Laurie, and he says, quote, "We go together, Laurie. I don't know why. Maybe like guns and ammunition go together." Okay, a little bit on the nose, but effective? Absolutely.
Yep, you get it right away.
Yeah.
Sometimes the dialogue is used almost poetically to speak the truth without really saying it. In The Brothers Rico, 1957, gangster Johnny Rico, played by the yummy James Naremore, predicts a dark future for his reformed brother Eddie, played by Richard Conte. Let's give a listen.
I'm sorry, Johnny. I hope she didn't.
How do you think you ought to go?
Johnny, I gotta have an answer, kid. Are you leaving? I don't want you and Nora to get hurt.
When I think my own brother...
Johnny, you gotta get away. Please, believe me. You gotta trust me. You'll be safe.
Eddie, if Nora loses that baby...
Johnny, I was only trying to do
Okay, so nobody's blaming you. Let's just say something happened way back, huh? So maybe I am gonna die. But Eddie, you got even bigger troubles. You're gonna live.
I loved it when film noir dialogue had shock value that helped set up the complexity of the movie's plot. And a great example of this happens in the opening of DOA from 1950. The scene is a long, behind-the-back tracking sequence that follows accountant Frank Bigelow, played by Edmund O'Brien, and he's walking purposefully through the hallway of a police station. He goes up to the homicide policeman in charge, and let's listen to his dialogue. It's fantastic.
"I want to report a murder."
Sit down. Where was this murder committed?
San Francisco, last night.
Who was murdered?
I was.
talk about drawing you in, right? I mean, you're ready like on the edge of your seat.
Talk about kicking off a movie.
Yeah.
Woo.
Now, usually, noir dialogue was incredibly sharp, cutting, and dagger-like. It's sort of like the things that you wish you could say when you're up against someone or something,
Yes.
but you just didn't think of at the time. In 1962, the neo-noir film Cape Fear, Diana, played by Barry Chase, cuts to the core after being raped by psychopath Max Cady, played by Robert Mitchum. And she says, "What I like about you is your rock bottom. I wouldn't expect you to understand this, but it's a great comfort for a girl to know she could not possibly sink any lower."
Wow.
Yeah.
Great writing.
Yeah, there's some people I'd like to have said that to.
But what great writers
it's just
to come
fabulous.
up with this. Yeah. Also, dialogue in film noir movies, it's often darkly humorous or it's full of these sexual innuendos.
Right.
You know, a classic example of this occurs in the scene from Double Indemnity, 1944, when, as we've talked about many times, insurance salesman Walter Neff, played by Fred McMurray, when he figures out that housewife Phyllis Dietrichson, played by Barbara Stanwyck, may have more than insurance on her mind. This exchange is fast-paced and sparkling with innuendo. Let's take a listen.
Mr. Neff, why don't you drop by tomorrow evening around 8:30? He'll be in then.
Who?
My husband. You were anxious to talk to him, weren't you?
Yeah, I was, but I'm sort of getting over the idea, if you know what I mean.
There's a speed limit in this state, Mr. Neff. 45 miles an hour.
How fast was I going, officer?
I'd say around 90.
Suppose you get down off your motorcycle and give me a ticket.
Suppose I let you off with a warning this time.
Suppose it doesn't take.
Suppose I have to whack you over the knuckles.
Suppose I bust out crying and put my head in your shoulder.
Suppose you try putting it on my husband's shoulder.
That tears it.
It doesn't get better than that.
Oh, my God.
And it's never spoofed any better either than Carol Burnett and Steve Lawrence
Oh, they're genius.
in the sketch Double Calamity. So good. In Clash by Night, 1952, there's an exchange between jaded May Doyle, played again by Barbara Stanwyck,
The great.
and bitter, unhappy Earl Pfeiffer, played by Robert Ryan, that reflects the lack of trust in the opposite sex.
Should we do the scene?
Let's do it.
You be May, I'll be Earl.
Okay, good. Last time I looked, you had a wife.
Maybe next time you look, I won't.
That's what they all say. Oh, that was fun.
You guys are great.
Right?
But I love just how snappy and cut to the core
Yep.
this dialogue is.
It's very lean.
Yes,
Yeah.
very lean. That's a great way to say it. And sometimes the dialogue in noir is just plain old funny. And I love this scene. In a lesser known noir called The Man I Love from 1947, torch singer Petey Brown, played by the great Ida Lupino, takes a look at herself in the mirror and she offers this self-evaluation about the new hat she just bought.
Okay.
And she says, she looks in the mirror and she goes, "I don't know why I paid $8.95 for this hat. It's a good thing I wasn't spotted by an organ grinder."
Moving on to narrative structure. In film noir films, things are never what they seem. I mean,
Never.
people don disguises. They use fake names. They impersonate other people. The plots and storylines, they're really complex with
Yes.
more twists and turns than a deserted road in the Hollywood Hills on a hot summer night, right? Narrative structure in noir is almost always non-linear.
Yes.
And it's commonly told in the first person. So, in order to achieve this non-linear maze-like manner of storytelling, writers and directors had several devices. Now, let's go over some of the most popular ones.
Yeah, I think one of the most popular was the voiceover.
Yes.
The voiceover, it was used to help tell the story from the point of view of one person, usually the protagonist. This first-person narration is highly subjective. Many film noir directors think the subjectivity of the narrator is a crucial part of noir. His point of view and his perceptions, whether accurate or skewed, all make the story more personal. And this device makes the film seem like a first-person novel. And, as Fritz Lang once said, you show the protagonist so that the audience can put themselves under the skin of the man by showing things wherever possible from the viewpoint of the protagonist. The film gives the audience visual and psychological access to his nightmarish experiences. Often, this voiceover narration is so the protagonist can confess or clear his conscience about something.
One of the best uses of first-person voiceover is the narration that Detective Sam Spade, played by Humphrey Bogart, offers suffers during the Maltese Falcon, 1941. With a distinct point of view, his cynical, subjective narration sets the tone, it creates the mood, and it helps explain the complexities of the plot. Lots of screenwriters think voiceover is kind of a nasty little shortcut to actually writing the story, but it does really do the trick in film noir.
Sometimes those plots are so complicated. You need something like voiceover to really lay out what's going on.
Exactly.
Also, in Dead Reckoning, 1947, the voiceover narration is used to clear the conscience and set the record straight for World War II Captain Rip Murdoch, once again played by Humphrey Bogart. In the film, it starts with Rip going to a church and finding Father Logan, played by James Bell. He then tells Father Logan in a very confessional style what has happened to him over the past few days, and he wants to clear his name.
Narration is also used really well in Edgar G. Ulmer's classic Detour, 1945. The story is told from the point of view of Al Roberts, played by Tom Neal. He's a young piano player who is hitchhiking east from California. At a roadside diner, he hears a song that reminds him of his former life in New York. And through flashbacks and voiceover, he tells the crazy story of how hitchhiking led to murder and mayhem.
Don't hitchhike, people. Don't hitchhike. In Otto Preminger's Laura from 1944, it also begins with voiceover, but the voiceover is from Waldo Lydecker, played by Clifton Webb. He's the snobby, imperious gossip columnist who helps Laura, played by Jean Tierney, in her career, and he's strangely obsessed with her. This was very unusual because usually the voiceover is from the protagonist's point of view. This time it's from a secondary character who, as it turns out, and spoiler alert here, he ends up being the one who tried to kill Laura. So very interesting use of voiceover from that perspective.
And in an interesting turn, the voiceover narration of John H. Auer's City That Never Sleeps, 1953, it's the city itself. The city introduces its quote-unquote citizens, including Gig Young, Mala Powers, William Tallman, Marie Windsor, and Paula Raymond. The city also lays out the story, exercising that same first-person subjectivity as a protagonist would, as an actual person would. It's a really clever device, and it's kind of fun hearing the city make judgy comments about everything along the way.
I know. I love the use of voiceover that it's the
fun.
city speaking. It's very cool. Voiceover was also used effectively, and God, there's so many movies. I mean, think about Sunset Boulevard from 1950 and The Killers, 1946, The Great Flammarion, which we talked about when we did our Mary Beth Hughes episode. I mean, so many great films used that device so effectively.
Yes. Before we get into the other creative aspects of film noir, what is this week's Hollywood Pop Quiz?
Last week, we asked who was the first actor to play Detective Sam Spade. Of course, the answer was Ricardo Cortez. This week, our question is, who was the first actor to play Detective Mike Hammer, who's also a film noir legend, if you will, in the film noir genre.
All right.
So who was the actor and what was the movie?
Perfect. We will be back with the answer and more on film noir after this.
Steve and Ann will be right back, but first another stop on the Hollywood tour. As they've talked about during this film noir series, one of the genre's best-known titles is 1944's Double Indemnity, starring Barbara Stanwyck and Fred MacMurray. It's the film where Stanwyck plays a smoldering woman. You can just sense she's dangerous, a hot mess before that term was even a thing. She convinces her husband's insurance agent, Fred MacMurray, to help her murder her husband for the money. Well, keep in mind, MacMurray's character's not exactly moral either. He's only too willing to buy into her plan. Billy Wilder directed and co-wrote the script with Raymond Chandler. They didn't get along very well. But when the script was done, Wilder first offered the wife's role to Stanwyck. She read the script and hesitated. She told Wilder she'd never played such a truly evil character. She admitted it. She was afraid of the role. Her words. Wilder famously looked her in the eyes and asked quietly, "Well, are you a mouse or an actress?" She replied, "Well, I hope I'm an actress." He smiled and said, "Then do the part." Clearly it worked. Long story short, Stanwyck got the Best Actress nomination for the role, and the film got 7 Oscar nominations, including Best Picture. Here's to being an actress and not a mouse. And now back to Steve and Ann from Beneath the Hollywood Sign.
Welcome back, everybody. But before we get further into our third part of Film Noir, I wanted to give a shout out to our listener of the week, and that is Adele Ballard. Thank you, Adele, for all the likes, all the suggestions, all the comments, and all the support. We love it.
Thanks, Adele. Well, let's talk about flashbacks, because flashbacks are a very popular part of film noir films. It goes hand in hand with voiceover narration, right?
Yes.
The person starts to say, I remember a time, and then we go back, right? Allowing the story to begin at the end or at a dramatically critical point. So it could kick off a movie in a really exciting way and keep viewers guessing as to what's happened. It's also a great device to emphasize that not everything is as it appears, right?
Right.
The plot would then be revealed, usually by our male protagonist. Several films that follow this formula were really successful. The use of flashbacks also added to the sense of hopelessness and fatalism, since the outcome has already been determined. There's nothing you can do to change it.
Absolutely.
Often, film noir movies begin with the protagonist's murder and then use flashbacks to tell the story that leads up to their demise. Now, there's a couple of classics here that do this, right?
Yes.
The Killers, 1946, and Sunset Boulevard, 1950.
Yeah, because in The Killers, if you all know from 1946, it opens with two hitmen arriving in this peaceful small town and killing service station attendant Pete Lund, played by Burt Lancaster. And then insurance investigator Jim Reardon shows up, played by Edmund O'Brien, and he has to track down the beneficiaries of Pete Lund. And through flashbacks, we learn his whole story, which is a really clever way to tell that narrative.
Yeah.
And also in Sunset Boulevard, as we all know, it iconically opens with the body of screenwriter Joe Gillis, played by William Holden, being fetched out of the pool. And the pool, of course, belongs to delusional old-time actress Norma Desmond, played by Gloria Swanson. And Joe then begins to tell the story that leads up to his demise. What a way to start a film.
Yeah. Another one where you just are, if you've never seen it, you immediately are on the edge of your seat. What's going to happen?
And you're drawn in immediately.
Yeah. Often flashbacks are used to tell the story from multiple points of view. An example of this is in The Locket, 1946. Nancy, played by Lorraine Day, is about to be married to John Willis, played by Gene Raymond. Things get complicated when psychiatrist Harry Blair, played by Brian Ahern, Nancy's ex-husband, shows up and through the use of flashbacks warns John about Nancy. Ooh. Apparently she isn't who he thinks she is, and actually she's an unstable murderer. So we also learn of Nancy's past through her first husband, artist Norman Clyde, played by the great Robert Mitchum, and we learn of the childhood that damaged her through Nancy's own flashbacks. So it's all these different points of view, and it even has flashbacks within flashbacks.
Or I love when a flashback happens and the character isn't even in their own flashback. I love that. Flashbacks are also used effectively in other great film noirs. I think about DOA. We talked about it earlier when accountant Edmund O'Brien is poisoned and goes to the police to tell his story. And in Tension, 1949, Police Lieutenant Collier Bonnabel, played by Barry Sullivan, he tells about a famous case through flashbacks. And in The Invisible Wall from 1946, gambler Harry Lane, played by Don Castle, explains how he came to be accused of murder. And also in The Strange Love of Martha Ivers from 1946, the beginning of the film is a flashback that shows a young Martha, played as an adult by Barbara Stanwyck. It shows her killing her aunt. This event informs the future of Martha and her childhood friend, Sam, played by Van Heflin, and Walter, played by Kirk Douglas.
Yeah, that's a great use. Another way of forwarding the story is through dream sequences.
Oh, great element. I love the dream sequences.
And with the popularity of Sigmund Freud's study of dreams, film noir writers used dream sequences as a device to give the audience insight into the subconscious mind of noir characters. It really was something that was used, I think, because of the advent of that. You don't really see dream sequences being used in films nowadays.
Yeah.
It could show the mental disturbance of a character, or it could be used as a way of expressing the protagonist's inner demons and conflicts. Sometimes the dream sequence was used in noir as a portent of things to come. A recurring dream proves a crucial element in The Dark Past, 1948, when Al Walker, played by William Holden, a cold-hearted killer, and his criminal gang hold a police psychologist, Lee J. Cobb, and his family hostage. The psychologist gets Walker to open up about the recurring nightmare he's had since childhood. And so the dream proves to be the key to what made Walker a killer.
Yeah, great use of that. And at the time, the dream sequence in Murder My Sweet from 1945 was a very risky move. In the dream, Private Eye Philip Marlowe, played by Dick Powell, is hit over the head with a gun and has this very surrealistic dream that represents his confusion with the case that he's trying to solve. The dream is art directed in this very expressionistic manner with multiple doors he must go through, menacing cobwebs, a doctor chasing him with a big hypodermic needle. It's crazy. But Murder My Sweet also incorporated flashbacks and cynical voiceover narration too, so it used several of the elements.
So it's the trifecta. It's dream sequences, flashbacks, and voiceover narration.
Very well done.
In The Woman on the Beach, 1947, Scott, played by Robert Ryan, a Coast Guard officer, suffers from recurring nightmares involving a maritime tragedy. He sees himself in an eerie landscape surrounded by a shipwreck and walking over skeletons at the bottom of the sea. Also in the dream, he sees a blonde woman who beckons him. This dream serves as a premonition of his fateful meeting with a married woman, played by Joan Bennett, that spirals him into a dark vortex of danger.
And who could ever forget the famous dream sequence that was designed by surrealist artist Salvador Dali in the great Alfred Hitchcock film Spellbound, 1945, which I know we've talked about a little bit before.
Yes.
In the movie, the young psychoanalyst, Dr. Constance Peterson, played by Ingrid Bergman, she meets a new colleague at the sanitarium where she works. He calls himself Dr. Anthony Edwards, played by Gregory Peck, of course, but as it turns out, he's really a man named John who suffers from dissociative amnesia and can't remember who he really is or why he poses as Dr. Edwards. He believes he may have killed Dr. Edwards. Dr. Peterson eventually coaxes the events from his mind by analyzing his dreams and studying his behavior, ultimately saving him. John's dream is full of these psychoanalytical symbolism. There's eyes and curtains and scissors and playing cards, some of them blank. There's a man with no face, a man falling off a building, a man hiding behind a chimney and dropping a wheel and being pursued by large wings. It's crazy.
It's weird.
Very, very Salvador Dali crazy. But the dream sequence was supposed to originally be this elaborate 20-minute sequence, but it was later cut down to 2.5 minutes.
In Manhandled, 1949, struggling writer Alton Bennett, played by Alan Napier, tells his psychiatrist, Dr. Redman, played by Harold Vermilia, about his recurring nightmare about killing his wife. When Dr. Redman's assistant, Merle Kramer, played by Dorothy L'Amour, casually mentions Bennett's dream to her detective boyfriend, Carl Benson, played by Super Weasel Dan Duryea,
Slick Weasel.
Benson sees an opportunity to make some money, and the dream becomes the catalyst for Benson's dark fall into deception and murder.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Yeah, it is.
And the final element of film noir movies that we're going to talk about is the fatalistic theme. I mean, reflecting Cold War era attitudes, many film noir movies featured very cynical or fatalistic tones with this bleak pessimism that sets the mood. The lack of hope and an acceptance that things will end tragically permeated many of these films. Even the titles of many film noir movies suggest the inherent fatalism that all will not end well for the protagonist. Think about The Killers, The Big Sleep, So Dark the Night, Born to Kill, Kiss of Death, Force of Evil, The Setup, In a Lonely Place, Kiss Me Deadly. I mean, it goes on and on and on.
Yeah, and we've talked about this, how I can never remember the titles of these movies because they all have like death in them or...
Yeah, and they're a little generic, you know.
They are generic.
Revenge, you know, revolt,
yeah.
You know, things like that. It's only when the protagonists are put in these desperate situations due to circumstances beyond their control that they seem to accept their ill fate and they see no hope of a happy ending due to their natural outlook on life, which is another element of film noir. Now, these noir characters are often characterized as melancholy, disillusioned, morally corrupt, obsessive, paranoid. They seem to know that things will end badly for them, and many times they are right.
Yeah. Fatalism is alive and well in Fritz Lang's Scarlet Street, 1945. This tragic and heartbreaking film centers on Chris Cross, played by Edward G. Robinson. He's a middle-aged cashier and an amateur painter. He's lonely, he's trapped in a loveless marriage, and he really seems to accept his fate until he meets ruthless schemer Kitty March, played by Joan Bennett. Unbeknownst to Chris, Kitty and her fiancé Johnny Prince, played by Dan Duryea, see him as a sucker they can manipulate for financial gain. As Chris falls more and more for Kitty, she continues to deceive and use him, ultimately resulting in tragic endings for all. Chris's initial fate is actualized.
Yeah. Now, in the 1948 film Moonrise, Danny Hawkins, played by Dane Clark, he's the son of a murderer. And throughout his childhood, he's haunted by his father's past, and he grows to accept that he will likely become a murderer too. It's his fate. And when Danny kills a man in self-defense, he's convinced it happened because of the murderous genes he shares with his father. Now, this causes him to go off the deep end, and it's only when his grandmother, Ethel Barrymore, reveals family secrets that he's able to save himself.
Another example out of the past, 1947, two-bit cynical detective Jeff Bailey, played by Robert Mitchum, is hired to locate Kathy Moffat, played by Jane Greer, a businessman's missing girlfriend. Bailey makes the mistake of falling for the double-crossing femme fatale. Kathy Moffat sums up her own fatalistic views when she tells Jeff, "If you're thinking of anyone else, don't. It wouldn't work. You're no good for anyone but me. You're no good, and neither am I. That's why we deserve each other."
Wow.
Yeah, that about sums it up, right?
That cuts to the chase, for sure. The fatalistic theme is also prevalent in A Lonely Place, 1950, directed by Nicholas Ray. When down-on-his-luck screenwriter Dixon Steele, played by Humphrey Bogart, falls in love with his new neighbor, Laurel Gray, played by Gloria Graham, who happens to be the only person who can provide him with an alibi in the murder of a young girl, his pessimism and paranoia destroy any hope they have for a future. He writes poetically and prophetically when he says, and this is a quote, "I was born when I met you. I lived while I loved you. I died when you left me."
I mean, that is truly poetical.
And so cynical. Yeah. That concludes our 3-part section on film noir. So there you have it, folks.
All right, Steve, in part 1, you gave us IndieWire's top 5 film noirs. I think everybody out there wants to know, what are Steve Cubine's top 5 film noirs? And I bet you have like a top 25.
It's an impossible question.
And does it change too over the time?
It does change, but if top of my head, I would have to say The Big Heat.
Okay.
Because that's the film that introduced me to film noir. And it's just stayed my favorite throughout all these years.
Yeah.
But I also have to mention Double Indemnity.
Yes.
Barbara Stanwyck was never better. In a Lonely Place, we just talked about it. It was so good. Sunset Boulevard.
Yeah.
Pickup on South Street is definitely a favorite of mine. The Asphalt Jungle is up there. Thieves Highway, Nightmare Alley, Crisscross, A Woman in the Windows, Raw Deal, Niagara, Act of Violence. I could go on and on and on. I have so many favorites.
Yeah.
So that's just a few of them.
Well, those are great ones that if you haven't seen them, start diving in.
Check it out.
And make your own list. We'd love to hear from you what your favorites are.
Yeah, email us your favorites at info@FromBeneathTheHollywoodSign.com.
It's time for the answer to this week's Hollywood Pop Quiz. As a reminder, the question was, who was the first actor to play Detective Mike Hammer in film? Well, the answer is Biff Elliott, who was in I, the Jury, 1953. And we'd love it if you would follow us on social media. And Heckfire, give us a 5-star review if you wouldn't mind. Our handle is @FromBeneathTheHollywoodSign. You can find us on Facebook, on Instagram, and you can watch the podcast on YouTube.
That's this week's view.
From Beneath the Hollywood Sign.
You've been listening to From Beneath the Hollywood Sign with Steve Cubine and Ann McNamara, the podcast that celebrates amazing stories of Tinseltown from its golden era. Join us next week for another episode and learn something else about Hollywood you probably never knew. Take a moment and give us a 5-star rating and a positive review, and tell your friends about us too. It'll help grow the podcast. Visit Steve's website at FromBeneathTheHollywoodSign.com. The executive producers are Steve Cubine and Nan McNamara. Executive producer and post-production supervisor Lindsay Schnebley. Associate producer and researcher John Price Ritchie. This podcast is part of the Airwave Media Podcast Network. Visit airwavemedia.com to listen and subscribe to their other fine shows like The Box of Oddities and The Shallow End with Schnebley and Toth. Copyright 2025. All rights reserved. That's a wrap.